British anime fan in the 90s, there was one name you knew before all the others. They were slick, they were edgy, their dubs had a lot of swearing.
I'll rip your head off and down your neck, okay?
Hardcore fans hated them, but if you were a rebellious teenager, they were the brand that became your gateway drug. For a few years, Manga Video succeeded in making anime mainstream. They spread internationally. They co-produced Ghost in the Shell, and the founder? A young music industry executive named Andy Frayne. The Anime Business, brought to you by Animego. Here's what we have coming out.
Romeo! Alfredo! 僕は言わないよ。さよならなんか。また会おう。きっと。僕たちはずっと一緒だ。どんなに離れても、どんなに離れても忘れない。今日は僕たちの誓いの日だ。
Buy it today at MediaOCD.com for an exclusive slipcover, or from other anime retailers. English and Japanese captions are courtesy of the Kleckner Foundation. Thank you.
Basically, I came from the music business. Prior to music business, from early days at school, I wanted to be a musician. I sort of followed that path for some time. By way of a sort of a fluke, I got a job, must have been sort of very early 80s, working for a small independent record company called Hannibal Records. I was probably better at the business side of music. Started playing less and less and focusing on the business side more. Went on to another music company and then a very large music company, what was then CBS Records, now Sony, of course. Whilst I learned quite a lot there, I really didn't like it, the sort of corporate structure. And I had a friend, my oldest friend, was working at Island Records at the time, or the music publishing side of Island Records. He said, well, look, a job's opening up, do you want to come and work here? And I jumped at the chance. Island was one of my favourite record labels since being a kid. Sort of almost the rest is history. Ultimately, Chris Blackwell, the founder of Island Records, took me under his wing. This would have been 1986, I think. Ultimately, he decided to sell the company, which went through towards the end of 1989. I was running a division called Island Visual Arts, which Chris described as an audio-visual record label. Content that was not primarily made for the feature film theatrical market or for the television market. Primary distribution channel was the video market, which at the time was becoming a sort of quite a big thing. The start of the company was called Island World Communications. Didn't actually happen immediately. I was sort of chained to the new Island, still Island Visual Arts, but was now owned by Polygram. Chris was on the board of Polygram now, so there was hope that we could grow this company of Island Visual Arts in a way that I wanted and that he wanted. Ultimately it didn't happen. Chris and I sat down with Alain Levy, who was the head of Polygram at the time, and Chris's great skill, he managed to manipulate it that I came out and there was no conflict. We could do anything we wanted. As long as it was in that strand of audio visual for a video market, we weren't trying to make feature films or television programs or series, create new programming or license in new programming that nobody else was. We actually did do a lot of documentaries. When I say did, we licensed them, so cutting edge, but also I had a different strategy for how to market them. We did a lot by mail order because you couldn't get them into retail. Most large retailers wouldn't take documentaries, but we had some great success by building a catalogue and selling them through mail order. And also comedy, that was sort of a big strand. We did some animation, but children's animation. Shakespeare, The Animated Tales, I remember, which was Russian co-production. I came across the review of Akira in Time Out magazine, and it had this small still which just looked incredible. I showed this review to Lawrence Guinness, who I think you should go and check this out. And he did. He came back really enthusiastic and said, it's amazing. We should definitely do this. It probably had about a 2-week run at the ICA. I do remember him pestering me through the next, whether it was week or 2 weeks, have you gone yet? You need to go and see this. You need to go and see this. The world maybe has got to thank Lawrence for continuing to pester me. It was the last day. He said, it's the last day. You've got to go and see this film. So I went, and I think there was maybe one, possibly two other people in the cinema. It wasn't as though this was kind of a great hit, but it certainly hit me right between the eyes. I was just shocked. Now, that may well be because I wasn't one of those kids who grew up reading comic books and even watching animation. So I just thought it was incredible. It was nothing like I'd seen before. I mean, I remember telling people for a long time, it's like Blade Runner in animation. And it definitely wasn't for kids. You know, it would be wrong to call it a cartoon. That to me would have been an insulting thing. And it just seemed to fit the ethos of what I felt Chris wanted the company to be. This was definitely different, it was exciting. I sort of always had the view that if I really like something, I mean really like it, there's got to be at least a few 100,000 other people who are going to feel the same as me. That really was the start of how we got into anime and how Manga Video and Manga Entertainment followed. Well, I remember we were in a bidding war, or at least the direct, Simon Field, who was the director of the ICA, said we were, with Virgin Video. You know, looking back, I think we probably paid way too much. But I really felt so strongly about it. It was just so distinctive for me, and I felt that it could define what the label was about. For Akira, we only had the video right, actually the UK video rights, which we licensed from it's called ICA Project. They license the rights, so they have their own cinema, so they put it on their own cinema, and also they're a distributor as well, so the theatrical distributor. So I mean, I really don't remember how well it did, or even if Simon got it into other independent cinemas across the UK. I don't remember that. So we put a lot into it, actually, in terms of the marketing. I didn't know it was a genre, but I was so fascinated by the title, and of course I knew that it came from Japan. I saw it in Japanese with English subtitles. And the fact that it was so different, I mean, to my eyes, unique. I then went on the voyage of discovery. Were there more films like this in Japan? And the idea was starting to germinate in my head that if that were the case, we should create a label. It didn't happen on Akira, because if Akira had flopped, Manga Video never would have come into being. So the research wasn't quite as easy as it might be just typing something into Google. But nevertheless, that's what my team did. And also I insisted that we got in touch directly with Kodansha. I can't remember how I found out. Perhaps Kodansha told me, I'm guessing they did, but they had a scale bike from Akira. I mean, this thing was heavy. The marketing of Akira in Japan was done, so they didn't need this. They were probably glad to get rid of it, I imagine. So we certainly paid for the shipping of it over from Japan. We got it put inside the front window of HMV Oxford Street. I mean, which is the most prestigious music retailers, music and video film retailers in the country. So that gave us massive promotion, and we ran a competition, which of course incentivized people to buy Akira from HMV rather than other retailers, which we went into this draw. I can't remember if you had to answer any questions or not, but certainly the winning ticket, you got this bike. And I remember the winner coming, and he was only about, let's say he was a small-looking 15-year-old, and he came with his mother, and the bike was now out of Oxford Street, HMV, and was in our office. His mother looked at this thing, and it was just hilarious, because she thought it was something that was going to go in his bedroom. I mean, it was big. You need a proper truck to take it back home. It was a big hit, and big sales straight away, particularly in the music stores, not just HMV, but Virgin, Tower, and some of the independent stores as well. The video retail scene, multiple retailers selling video, but there were two retail chains that dominated in terms of volume, and they were Woolworths, which is now gone, is now defunct, and WH Smith, which it's a stationers and it sells magazines and newspapers and stationery, accounted for about 80% of all videos sold in the UK. So the perception from a business point of view was if you didn't have either, or ideally both, Woolworths and Smiths on your side, then there was no point in releasing it. I held a very different point of view and understood that there was no way would they stock these titles. Look, Andy, we're never going to be able to sell Akira. Is this a wise path to take? You know, let's focus elsewhere, whether it be on comedy or whatever. I said, no. What I want you to do is let's focus first on the music retailers like HMV and Virgin and Tower. Tell them we want your support, and we give you our assurance that we will not sell our videos into Woolworths and Smiths. They know Woolworths and Smiths aren't going to take your title. I know, but just, it's a bit of psychology, that's all. It worked. I mean, whether they were laughing about it, I don't know, but they did like that sort of sense of us working with them. I mean, despite the fact that those large music retailers were, you might say, are in direct competition with each other. They kind of like each other. They're sort of competing on an even footing, whereas they kind of really disliked Woolworths and Smiths, that they felt, and I would tend to agree with them, they shouldn't be in the business of selling music. So they kind of liked it. That was very much the start. So certainly then I went sort of pretty quickly to Japan. I'd been introduced to Carl Macek, that I know, through Kodansha. So he gave me a bit of advice, and he'd produced a dub of Fist of the North Star. I went after that title. So that's the first film that I bought directly from Japan. On that first trip to Tokyo, I also went to see Kodansha, started negotiation for several of their titles, including, I remember, 3x3 Eyes. Akira had proven the fact that we could sell this new genre of animation. Maybe I didn't even know it was called anime at that point, probably not. It wasn't just going to Japan. That was a big part of it, and certainly all the deals were finalized in Japan, but there were some other markets, MIPCOM and MIPTV, which still exists today, where the large Japanese companies, Toei Company used to go, and Kodansha used to go, and Tokyo Movie Shinsha used to go. They had been remarkably unsuccessful over the preceding years in selling their films to international, particularly Western international audiences, Europe and the US as well, I think. Yeah, I already had in mind what our audience would be. And again, it's about being focused on that. It didn't take long for me to see how vast wealth of Japanese animation is, and covering all genres. And the same with the manga. I mean, businessmen to school children reading these massive manga on the subway in the morning was just something that was sort of extraordinary to me. But of course, the content within those manga was completely different from the businessman or the housewife to the children. And so it is with the anime as well. So I didn't want to be all things to all people. I wanted to be this kind of specific label. And we'd already pinned our colours to the mast by Akira and followed up by Fist of the North Star. So yeah, it was very much a young male audience. Fantasy, horror, sci-fi. What's it going to be called? I wanted a new word. That was important to me. For it to look quite tough and aggressive. People called us the punk rock of video, I think, at one point. I mean, it's probably not too far from the truth. The manga came about when I understood that most of the films were derived from the Japanese comic books. And I did get highly criticized in the beginning from some quarters of the certainly the UK fandom. You can't call this manga video. And I thought, well, why not? That's like, if you like comic book video, it is what it is. And most of these films are derived from there. Also because it was a new word, at least in the English language. It was a hard-sounding word, tough, manga. I know it's not representative of all anime, but it was definitely representative of the anime that I felt that we were going to go after, for the demographic that we were going to go after, at least initially. And then when I discovered the kanji loosely translate as irresponsible pictures from the sort of ancient Chinese kanji, then that's it. You know, I absolutely loved that. And in fact, that was a central plank of our PR, was we are the irresponsible picture company. What I certainly knew is that nobody would, even probably most of the aficionados, would not know the titles that we were going to be releasing. I mean, I estimated at the time, and this I'd gotten to know by this time Helen McCarthy, so I'm sort of going by her initial estimates of her, what was then a fanzine, essentially. And so I think there were probably less than 500 people in the UK that knew about what anime was. And so even if all of those would know the titles that we would have released after Akira, that wasn't enough to sustain a business. So it was very much about creating a brand, creating a label, and actually most of our marketing, particularly initially, was marketing the brand, and then the film titles followed. Most conventional marketing in film or music, you market the title, which is already well known. We did flip that on its head, and we were marketing a company, we were marketing a brand. And the film titles were, at least in the beginning, secondary to the brand. Chris's attention to detail about everything, not just the music, but was about packaging as well, the importance of packaging and the importance of logos. Yes, one thing to come up with the name, but then the representation of that, it says, it speaks what you want it to say. So I worked with a fantastic creative director, art director at Island Records called Bruno Tilly. He had left Island sort of around the same time as me, a little bit before me, and gone independent. He won't promote himself, so I will. I mean, the many album sleeves that he designed that are classics, but I think he's got about 4 or 5 that are in Rolling Stone's top 100 album sleeves of all time. And so he became our kind of de facto creative director, art director. I sort of gave him a little bit of a brief of what I wanted it to say. And then Bruno did his magic and came back with the manga logo that we all either love or hate today, till this day. Lawrence Guinness, who'd been my go-to person, sort of acquisition executive. He'd come from a video editing background, so he had some sort of technical prowess. That really then sort of became his role as we sort of fairly quickly made a decision to stop really looking for other titles outside the anime because of the success not only of Akira but Fist of the North Star really hit off very quickly. So I sat down with Chris, I think we should just focus on this, and he agreed, and it was that point that we changed the name of the company. It wasn't a new company, we just changed the name of the company from Island World Communications to Manga Entertainment. And so that was Lawrence's domain, looking after to that side. So this is the first time I've seen this in about 30 years. So actually it would be more than 30 years. The Manga Video label's first press release. We hadn't changed the name of the company at the time. So it was the first release on Manga Video, which was just a video ident. But I still see the Island World logo down here at the bottom. So it was probably another 6 months before we changed the name of the company to Manga Entertainment. Island World was gone at that point. I remember thinking that I wanted the company to be the video Def Jam, the video equivalent of Def Jam. Whereas at the time, early 90s, Def Jam was kind of, very distinctive in terms of its releases, content, artists, and how it marketed itself. That if you liked that genre of music, you would buy the next Def Jam release because you probably were going to like it. So that was very much in my head when kind of coming up with the video, the Manga Video concept. It wasn't necessarily the demographic. It wasn't so much that, it was about it being distinct. You probably wouldn't be disappointed or vastly disappointed buying a new record by a new artist on Def Jam because it was going to be in the same musical ilk. That's how I felt, and that of course would definitely be the case with what we were trying to do with Manga Video. Yeah, with Akira, I don't think we had any major backlash. It's largely positive press. With Fist of the North Star, obviously that was an 18 certificate and, a fair amount of violence in that. So we did start to get some press backlash, but we definitely courted it. I distinctly remember giving the whole story about the manga label, that was central. So, that alone, we were sort of courting controversy, particularly the mainstream media. There were certain journalists that would receive every single title. We would only send the kind of hardest, one might say most disgusting, titles to the right-wing press like the Daily Mail. They're kind of in on the whole thing as well. We would get a double-page spread saying stop your children seeing this filth, you know. So, I mean, you know, it was engineered. We didn't send them every title. It was only the ones that were pretty well disgusting, where we felt we could get a rise out of the mainstream press, and particularly the right-wing conservative press. We poked the bear deliberately. If their intention was to get parents to prevent their children from buying and or watching these titles, it had the absolute opposite effect. You know, the sales went through the roof, which of course is why we did it. We were working off a blank sheet of paper. And certainly in the UK, I mean, the numbers were different in the US. The number of people, fans, the otaku of anime was much bigger in the States and geeky and more knowledgeable. We didn't really have, or we did, but it was very, very small. I absolutely clashed with some of those people, some of those journalists. I mean, on the one hand, I suppose they liked the fact that finally there was a company that was bringing over and releasing these titles at an affordable price and pristine video. But they didn't like our approach, that's for sure. For me, at least, was a blessing in disguise, because we didn't have to pander to this market. I mean, I got criticised all the time because it was pretty vocal, but it didn't bother me because it didn't really make any commercial sense. It wasn't a large enough lobby. I mean, we did release some subtitled versions of ones we felt were going to be larger selling titles like Akira. We didn't have to pander to that, I suppose is what I'm trying to say. The other thing that I think was relevant to sales was the certification. All films have to be submitted to the British Board of Film Classification, the BBFC. And the same, it has to be resubmitted for video release. Those with the higher certification, i.e. the highest certification is A18, would sell better than something if it was 15 or definitely something that was just a PG. Bearing in mind that nobody really knew what these titles were. There wasn't a sort of history of them being out on theatrical release, and so there'd been those reviews. And so that was a kind of good benchmark, I think, for the buyers. If I've now got a choice, I'll go for the 18 rather than the 15. That we definitely played up to. Now, there were certain titles that naturally were an 18 certificate, but there were others that could have been marginal. So what we did to up the certification was definitely we tweaked the dub. Had, more expletives than perhaps it needed to have. And that was a deliberate thing that we did to achieve that higher certification, which we knew would achieve higher sales. Yeah, I don't ever remember us changing the story wholesale. Just putting a little bit more zip into it. Also, yes, we definitely wanted to make it more American, or at least transatlantic, than being British. I mean, it was also looking to that wider market. It's not Los Angeles, so and this is the early 90s, so really used what we had available to us. Well, to put it in context, huge title, which like a Disney title, it might sell between 1 and 2 million copies. A big title, sort of a big feature film, would be maybe 250,000 to 500,000. Unless you were up against a Disney title that week, that month, you'd be number one, number two in the video chart. We were doing, at the low end, 10,000, 15,000 to 100,000, and then even above 100,000, maybe 120, 150,000. Yeah, we were doing pretty good numbers, and certainly for a relatively small company, definitely when one considers these were not known titles. Almost without exception, there were some exceptions. Titles that sold in these massive numbers were already known. They were the video releases of large feature films that had millions of pounds of marketing spent on them. And ours were just not known at all. I'm certainly really proud of that achievement for me and my team at the time of what we did. All the early titles sold really well. I don't think Akira was surpassed until Ghost in the Shell. By and large, we stayed sort of within those same genres, and they even kind of overlap. It was more really when I think we started releasing too many titles. The fan base was growing, that's for sure. Given it was fairly young, there's so much disposable income that most people have, and they could probably afford 1, perhaps 2 videos a month, but not 5. So I think it was more to do with that, our kind of release pattern, that sort of slowed things down, and I remember sort of reflecting on that. I realised there was nothing that I had seen that was as good as Akira. For me, Miyazaki's work, as fantastic as it is, I didn't feel fit within the manga video label. It was the Japanese Disney. It was family entertainment, which is fantastic. We considered doing a manga junior label or creating another brand. That was considered at one time, and you know, I kind of discounted it. But yeah, it was more the slowdown at a certain period where I think we were probably releasing too many titles. My memory of that actually goes back kind of actually to Helen McCarthy. Then, you know, kind of initially a sort of a photocopied fanzine called Anime UK. I can't remember exactly when she came to see us. She obviously saw an opportunity. We helped her quite a bit actually through advertising, so she suddenly had a much bigger budget. And so the magazine turned into a proper magazine rather than just a sort of fanzine. It was in our interests to get that wider distribution. Mike Priest, sales and marketing director, went to Smiths and I think got that initially into Smiths, which sort of helped us. We gave them more advertising and so on. Dark Horse wanted to sell their UK division. By this time, I was very friendly with head and the owner of Titan Distribution. Told me about the Dark Horse, and you know there were some nice guys there, and is it something that we wanted to do? So we did. Primary reason for doing it was thinking that where is the future of this company going? A lot of the titles that we were starting to release kind of substandard. Least felt that we should certainly start co-producing with the Japanese. Future might not just be Japanese. I was trying to create a company that was interested in making new, innovative animation that was targeted at adults rather than kids. And a great way to start generating our own ideas, our own IP, was through the comic book world. So that was certainly going around in my mind, and also subsequently starting a small CGI studio as well. We then started a competitive magazine to Anime UK, or Manga Mania, our own, but specifically said to these guys they had their editorial independence. You know, I didn't want them to give glowing reviews to all our releases or not review a competitor's release. We had some competition from labels like Kiseki by this time. They were already publishing some other comic books, and we sort of kept doing that. So like, I remember doing the X-Files. But yeah, the goal was very much for me. I don't think we really ever got there by the time I left. But that certainly was my aim for doing it.
What about manga apparel?
Again, that sort of comes from the music world. Yeah, there's kind of the additional commercial value of selling some T-shirts and so on. But actually it was more than that. It was very much advertising in the street. It was always great. It brought a little smile to my face if I were walking down Oxford Street or anywhere and would see, a manga T-shirt. Which is sort of absurd. Seeing them in an Akira jacket or whatever, that's sort of one thing and great. That's also really nice. But basically, you're wearing my company's logo and advertising the company for me. Something that I would have bought, probably, because I think it did look cool and was certainly perceived to be cool at the time. And you kind of mentioned earlier about the club nights and things. That was all the same thing, sort of getting into different markets. I don't think any of us sat down and go, oh, how should we make this cool? We just sort of felt that it was. What things can we do to promote what we're doing in new and different ways? That was very much the conversation. I don't remember anyone ever go, oh, let's try. So the moment you try to be cool, you're not.
That's well beyond a branded T-shirt. That's full-on fashion.
I never thought that we should just be a UK label. Even after the first sort of toe in the water, Akira was only acquired for video rights for the UK because that's all that ICA had available. We went back to Kodansha and acquired wider rights after that, I think. Every single title after that, starting with Fist of the North Star, we acquired much wider territorial rights. Not North America to start with, either because they'd gone in the case of Fist of the North Star, but sort of partnership with John O'Donnell and Central Park Media sort of to split North America, and then Manga Entertainment's rights, which were all of Europe and Australasia. Maybe South America as well, I think. Yeah, it wasn't so much an agreement with John as an understanding. I don't know if that's the same thing. I mean, I was always honest with John that we would very likely want to start in the US at some point. Having, sort of reasonable knowledge of the US market from a music perspective, and it's sort of not that different with video, and particularly the manga label and how we were marketing it. I had a good idea of what the sort of costs would be and so on. So it sort of made sense to work with John for a period of time. But yeah, I'm pretty sure I was honest with him from the beginning about how that might turn out. So it was always, providing we continue to grow and succeed, that was always on the cards. It's the biggest market in the world, and so why not? Yeah, I mean, I didn't see why we'd created the success in the UK, and there seemed to be no reason why these films and the brand and the label couldn't be successful elsewhere. We initially had way more success in Southern Europe than we did in Northern Europe. Spain in particular was fantastic. It's a guy called Luis Lopez, and he owned a chain of video stores and been involved in some independent film distribution. But really, he was a video retailer. So he was excited to get involved. We made a deal with him. He started a company called Manga España. And not only did we license our titles to him, but we licensed the logo as well. So he used our branding. So he paid us a distinct separate royalty for use of the logo. It wasn't quite a franchise, but yes, that kind of model. He couldn't directly license a film. So, for example, if there was a Japanese, even a non-Japanese film title that we hadn't acquired, he couldn't put it on the manga label without our permission. Broadly, yes, it was more like a franchise in that sense. We'd acquired all the titles and he released them. And Spain was a fantastic market. And we worked really closely together as well. So, and he was, I think because he came more from the retail side rather than already an established distributor, he was kind of happy to learn and take it from us. And it was also really nice for me. I mean, I was married to somebody at the time from Barcelona, and he was from Barcelona as well. So we became friends, and we used to spend quite a bit of time together. Italy was another big market, as was France, Belgium, and Netherlands. They picked off. Germany was quite slow, actually. Australia was great. I did that through, obviously same language, and they also used the same PAL system as us. It was a comic book market that was going to be over a long weekend in Sydney. There was a woman that had worked for us at Manga in the UK, who was Australian, and she'd gone back to live in Sydney. And so she helped coordinate it and work with me. And we shipped, somewhat illegally, I have to say. Not that I cared about those things in those days, because you couldn't actually just can't import products like that. It all had to kind of be properly certified and tax paid and everything. But I don't know what the hell, so ship boxes across to the hotel in advance, and we set up there. It was immensely successful. We sold out everything. And I took the opportunity as well of having a form, a kind of the equivalent of the Manga Club form, to start the Manga Club Australia. So we had several thousand names, signatures and names and addresses. And I'd been in conversation with some distributors, including Village Roadshow. And before this weekend, they'd given me some time in meetings, but really they thought, this isn't really very big. But suddenly they saw all of these stack of names, and suddenly they were kind of interested. In the end, I didn't go with them. I went with a smaller company. It sort of came about as did the co-productions and a lot of things that required, fairly substantial investment, on the back of almost losing the company, because Chris, after he'd sold Island Records, what he didn't sell was his film company, Island Pictures, which he then went into business with John Heyman to create the Island World Group. But by probably 1994, I think he was running into quite a lot of financial problems with Island Pictures. He'd sunk, I think, $50 million. You know, he was reluctant to put any more money in, and so he was then negotiating the sale of the film company to Polygram, who were now very actively getting involved in film with Polygram Film and Entertainment. We were going to be part of that. In fact, were part of it. Whilst we were doing, you know, sort of pretty well, from a sort of global perspective, you know, big international business, we were still really tiny. Chris had kind of let that go ahead, and I wasn't very happy about it, to say the least, particularly because it would mean that Manga was then part of a corporation, the very thing that I didn't want to be, and the same corporation. It wasn't specific that I didn't want to be part of Polygram. I just didn't want to be part of a corporation, which is why I kept out the whole thing, how we got to Manga in the first place. And we weren't big enough. We'd have just been swallowed, and within a couple of years, it would have been gone. So I went down to Jamaica to see Chris and persuaded him to let's take it out of the deal. And I said, you know, surely we can do that. I don't, in the scheme of things, really are the executives at Polygram, they're probably not even aware of what this Manga label is, and certainly not in the US because we hadn't launched there. So somebody in the UK may go, oh yeah, it's this kind of quirky little label. It's not going to be the breaker in the deal. Initially was, well, you know, but they could bring you a lot more finance and da-da-da. But anyway, I persuaded him that I just didn't think it would work, and certainly not for me. He rather brilliantly got us out of the deal and got the financing that we needed. And how he did it, he had a meeting with the then world chairman of Polygram, Alain Levy. And of course, Levy didn't know what Manga was. And he was going through the agenda of various things. He said, oh, you know, Alain, look, at the end of the meeting. Now, what are we going to do? I'm really keen on this little company that we've got that is part of the company you're about to buy in the Island Pictures, Island World, called Manga. Alain had no idea what it was. Chris had already got one of his staff to go down to Tower Records at 4th and Broadway. He'd asked me, what's the worst, most explicit of the video. So I said, you know, Legend of the Overfiend, Urutsuki Doji. So he'd got that, and he'd got it lined up. He must have either done it himself or got somebody to find, you know, one of the most explicit bits. And he said, oh, it's this, Alain, you know, and here's the thing. What is this? Alain's shocked. He said, oh, well, look, here's some of it. Alain Levy nearly falls off his chair. Now, the timing as well couldn't have been better because he was in the process of floating, I think, 15 or 20% of Polygram on the US stock market. He went nuts. He says, we cannot have this. We are doing stock placement, you know, IPO. We can't do this at all. This is going to be terrible publicity. And so Chris's greatest acting was, but Alain, you've agreed. You know, this is big part of our strategy. I believe in this. What are we going to do? And he'd already asked me, well, how much money did we need to sort of go forward, do the things that I wanted to do, which included go into the US and start co-production. And I'd said £12 million. So we walked away with the money without giving any of the company away. I think they took a small percentage, actually. They did take a small percentage of equity, but not very much. With really the only condition was that we had to change our distributor to Polygram when those deals expired. But it wasn't even as bad as that. They had to match the deal, so they couldn't offer me any worse deal. We now had this sort of pot of money, and that then enabled us to start the co-productions, very, very importantly, get into the States, because also starting co-production, which, of course, the investment involved in co-production is way significantly more than just a licensing deal. So having our own US company, marketing company, it was going to be essential. There was no point doing one without the other. Those things were all intertwined together. But I'd been sort of thinking about planning from quite the early stages. As I say, I wasn't disingenuous with John O'Donnell. It was convenient for us to do that and often be in Japan at the same time and even sit in the same room. We had different contracts, but you know, he bought for North America, I'd buy for UK, Europe, Australia, wherever. We would do all the dubbing, and he would kick back 50% of the cost for the English dub. And I don't think he ever complained about that. He maybe didn't take somewhere we had additional costs, like with the music, perhaps. But yeah, it worked pretty well. But as I say, I was always clear to him pretty much from the beginning that that would be our long-term strategy. And he had no problem with that. In fact, he often said, well, why don't you buy us? He seemed like the natural partner, not least that he had the same titles, mostly. Negotiations broke down in the end, really, I think, because of a sort of philosophical difference, his and my overall business strategy and marketing strategy as well. John was very much about short-term profit, and I was much more about build brand, build the company over a long period of time. Short, we had to make money, but short-term profits were not important to me. And it's when that became clear. And in fact, I remember it was Larry Mostel, Chris's business manager, who sort of realised it before me, actually. We'd been in these meetings, and I don't think we were disagreeing on price to buy the company. I think John had started here, we'd started here, but we'd reached an area that I think we were almost both comfortable with. It was this philosophy that we kind of diametrically opposed. So, and as I say, it sometimes takes a third party to sort of see that. I don't remember John and I really ever arguing, kind of badly. It's just, this was pointed out to me. I went, oh, yeah, perhaps it's not such a great fit after all. We then moved on. It was through a Japanese company called Hero Communications that I'd been dealing with. They mentioned that they had an American company based on the West Coast called LA Hero. If we were interested, they would be interested in us buying them, and that's what happened. I felt that we could really improve the sales of the title by changing the music. It wasn't an easy decision to make, because obviously there's an inherent cost involved and you don't know whether that's going to turn into additional sales. So just where I felt, no, this to me isn't working as it is, and hitting that wider audience rather than the very tiny, in the UK, fanboy otaku market. Let's take that risk. Certainly for me, I loved those titles. I had high hopes for it, let's say. The creative side, I sat down with Rory McFarlane. He and I have been friends for years. We played in a band together. So we know our kind of shorthand language. I'm pretty sure I only gave him one kind of cue to get him off on the right road. It just happens to come from an American rock band called Mountain, from a track of theirs called Nantucket Sleigh Ride. I had the CD and kind of lined up, and he went, oh, okay, I know what you want. I was very used to being given those briefs where an advertising agency said, we want something like that. Of course, you can't do a facsimile of that, breaching copyright. So he was kind of used to that, as well as, being very good friends with me. I remember he said, and it wasn't me, I think it must have been Lawrence, that asked for the Cyber City to be put into the thing, which I know made Rory cringe. To be honest, I didn't mind it too much, but don't remember it as being, oh, we must do rock because rock is... rock was not in, really, that guitar-based rock. I don't think that was the in thing at the time. It was, for me, a specific bit of music that's the kind of theme, the sound that I want, that I thought fitted. And then, as I say, he adapted, so it wasn't all rock. He used the same musical motifs and themes, but definitely changed them. He turned it into electronic. Well, Kodansha were the first Japanese company that I got to know. They became really good friends. At the time, in this sort of early mid-90s, they would have an international department of 2 people or 3 people. They just didn't do that much business. They didn't need to. They sold enough in Japan. And with a personal friend, my main contact was the head of international at Kodansha, Tomio Yoshioka. He invited me to his home in Tokyo, which certainly at the time, that's quite unusual as a foreigner to be invited. So we were, good friends, and corporate friends as well. Family-owned business, and one of the Cannes, I don't know, it was the film festival or one of the TV markets, I think it was the TV market, Madame Oga, who was the owner, she's passed away now, but she was the head of the family. She came to Cannes for the first time, and so the company held this big party for her in one of the big villas outside of Cannes. I was asked to give a speech in her honour. There were only 2 people It was the author of Miffy, which they published in Japan, and me. So, I mean, it was quite an incredible honour. So, it's been this bond that's grown with me and the company. Back now of getting this investment, thanks to Chris Blackwell's great intervention with Polygram and having this war chest of finance, I could finally do those things, get America started, and think about what our first co-production was going to be. I thought Kodansha would be the company that I should do it with. I remember asking them, can you show me some of the manga that you have that's not been made into a film or series so far? I wanted something new. And they showed me several titles. The others I can't remember, but I said, this one looks great. Now, I can't read Japanese. I know a few words in Japanese. So it was just understanding the story, but just the visual look from the manga. So that's how that came about. And then they brought in Bandai Visual, who I had worked with and licensed some films from. Kodansha brought them in, and I think Watanabe-san, who was the president of Bandai Visual at the time, he was probably the most important person in anime features, adult anime features. And so he kind of knew everybody, and he introduced this fairly new studio called Production IG. They'd not produced a feature film before, so this was their first time round. So it was my first time round. I mean, one side of it was sort of pretty easy, that we agreed to put a third of the budget in. So Manga Entertainment put 1/3 of the budget, Bandai put 1/3 of the budget, Kodansha put 1/3 of the budget. Bandai had distribution rights for Japan and some Asian countries, and Manga had distribution for the rest of the world. We shared in the profits, so we did our own sales and put them out in the middle. The one thing that took a long time to get agreed, in fact, I think the contract wasn't even signed until the film was finished, that I insisted that we had sequel rights and prequel rights and basically everything, including the kitchen sink. Kodansha, who were leading the negotiations, it's their IP. Well, that's never happened. I mean, not in Japan. And this, I believe, we were the first Western company to do a co-production on an anime feature. So they had their precedents and they weren't going to move. And I said, well, I'm not going to move either, because for me, it wasn't so much about the risk of putting the 1/3 of the budget. I said, what you have to understand is that in Japan, although it's not been released as a film, the manga of Ghost in the Shell, and Masamune Shirow already was a successful manga artist. So you've got very little to no risk. I've got massive risk, not only in the production investment, but also I've got to spend even more than that, again, in releasing the film in the US and UK, etc. I said, if we make all that success for you, and then you want to make a sequel, and you can go with another company, that's just not fair. And I still think that that's not fair. So they finally acquiesced and we agreed. I know it's caused them some future problems, but that's how it came about. Still with the company when it was released in Japan, but I left by the time it was released in the UK and the US and elsewhere. But a key thing for me, and we had a big fallout, me particularly with Watanabe-san, Shigeru Watanabe, the president of Bandai Visual, was about music, because I wanted to have big input in terms of the music. Not necessarily the score, and actually I think the score is great. I mean, it's really good. But it was really a key part of my marketing, and especially for the US, actually, was that we would have at least 1 or 2 proper music tracks from existing bands. Key point in the film where Meiji Kusanagi goes under the water and Batu's on the boat. It's got a beautiful, beautiful scene. I thought there would be fantastic with Massive Attack's Unfinished Sympathy. And of course, I thought we could make a fantastic music video, great as well re-release of the track and all these things. So there were ideas like that I had. Anyway, that became a huge argument. Fists on tables and shouting in the boardroom. And in the end, we got a sort of small compromise for the international version. We got this track, Passengers, which was Brian Eno and U2. We had that on the end titles, but that didn't achieve what was my intent. So that was kind of a shame. I mean, it did really well. So, I mean, the budget was probably about half of what Akira's was. So I think in terms of visually what it achieved for the budget, I think actually it's really good. Yeah, there are parts in it that, I go, oh, God, I don't like to see, where there's limited animation. I mean, and that's being kind. That's the Japanese style as well. So yeah, I'm still proud of it. I think actually it was at the after party of premiere of Ghost in the Shell in Japan. We went to a private party in restaurants. There were probably around 30 or 40 people there. Not only from various people from important people from the film, but they also invited some of the other sort of top manga artists who'd nothing to do with Ghost in the Shell, but they were, they'd been invited to the premiere. I mean, I knew what he looked like because he's very distinctive. Long black hair, wore black leathers, and had reflector Ray-Ban Wayfarers all the time. At least in my eyes, a sort of cross between a Hell's Angel and a Yakuza. Just maybe a week or two before this event, we'd released Space Adventure Cobra. So we'd had some reviews and things, and of course, the negative reviews about this soundtrack totally ripped out and replaced the original soundtrack with Yellow. Clearly found their way to Japan by then. I hadn't thought anything about it until seeing him in the room. He's like the Mick Jagger of the manga world. I couldn't keep my head down as I'm the only gaijin there as well, the only foreigner. I had met Katsuhiro Otomo prior to this event and his producer, and it was his producer that introduced me to Ito-san, who's, I found out, Mr. Terasawa's producer, agent, manager, and Mr. Terasawa wants to meet you. So I had to get up, walk all the way around to the other side of this table. I think everyone could see what's happening, and this whole room went silent. So I'm now standing looking down at Terasawa-san. He's looking up at me, but I can't see his eyes because he's got these reflector shades. And smoking, he was a chain smoker as well, so long inhalations of his cigarette. And you've released my film, Space Adventure Cobra. Yes, I have. You changed the music in my film, Space Adventure Cobra. My heart's starting to race. You could hear a pin drop. Yes, I did. Very, very long pause. Looks back up. I love what you've done. Thank you. My heart goes back into my chest. One of it, I think, the first mangaka to be working in Apple Mac, which he told me, he invited me to his studio. He said, I want you to come and see this. I've got some great ideas and how we can use this new technology and take it into film. And I want to make a new film, and I want to make it with you. Your company, I would like you involved, but even if you're not able to or you don't want to, would you personally be the music producer on my new film? Otomo's producer comes over, Otomo-san wants to see you. So I'd sit down, talk with him. And I had met Otomo before, but I wouldn't say we were friends at that time. We'd met in the studio. He'd obviously heard all of this, as had everyone else, and he said, I'm making my new film at the moment, which was the anthology Memories. And he said, I want you to be the music producer or exec producer on the film. Would you do that for me? I'd be honoured. Yeah, my relationship with Chris, well, maybe it had deteriorated, but he was definitely having problems by this. I mean, actually, even the beginning of '95 with his role in Polygram, he wanted to get out. He was sort of under a kind of lot of pressure financially. He had some pressures in the film company. He started asking me to do a 180 degree and sort of stop investments into new co-productions and things like this. We were just really starting to get going. And I thought that it was the wrong thing for the company and definitely the wrong thing for me. I'd now got the taste as well for being involved in production, animation production. It just felt completely wrong, and I wasn't happy with that. So we had a pleasant lunch, and we agreed to go our separate ways. Personally, I'm proud of what we did. We weren't the first company. There was Streamline there. I think John O'Donnell with CPM was there. There were a few other companies. It's been said of us that we were probably the most important company to popularize Japanese anime in the West during that period of time. I think that's pretty true in Europe and in the States as well. So when we launched in the States, all the companies before that had selling to just the niche markets, the fanboy markets, which was much bigger than the UK, so that it was sustainable for a small business to do that. We had the might of Polygram as our distributor. It broke through straight away. First year of the US, probably 90% of the titles released were the LA Hero catalogue, which of course had already been released. I mean, and actually anyone that wanted it from the fanboy community had already bought it. I mean, we'd repackaged it, but it was the same title. So we probably got little to no sales there. It's just that we got it into all the big music stores. So it was new for this MTV generation. And we did a lot of that. We did make some deals with bands to do music videos with them. It was cheap for them and great for us. They had this fantastic looking content. We would basically do as a sort of partnership. I could say that as well because I was approached in that my last year, 95, by Ed Pressman, famous American film producer, sadly passed away earlier this year. He'd produced The Crow, the first Crow film with Brandon Lee. He only got to know about manga through when we released in America. Yeah, anime had been out there for quite a few years, and he's a smart guy. He's ear to the ground. But it was only when we came in and started doing our marketing in the US that he saw an opportunity. And so he came to see me. I'd really like to work with you. We want to do an anime version of The Crow. I mean, it never happened in the end. It almost did, with Katsuhiro Otomo directing, by the way. Yeah, but if there's sort of something that kind of acknowledges that, I suppose that for me, with sort of hindsight memory, I wouldn't say I distanced myself, but for many years I had no active involvement with anime. I've remained involved in animation, but not in anime, although the last couple of years I have gotten back and am working with Japanese anime companies again. I won't say I was oblivious to that, but I hadn't sort of kept my finger on the pulse of what's going on. Not in such high detail, I mean, I saw the shift, obviously, to streaming and Funimation and Crunchyroll and all of that. It was only with the re-release of Cyber City that I was sort of taken aback, and the UK distributor wanting to release the version with Rory McFarlane's music rather than the Japanese. And he didn't know how to get it and get it cleared. And so that was the sort of first time sort of was asked to look at this. Yeah, it was somewhat surprising, actually. I mean, pleasantly surprising. And those nice things that were being said, particularly for Rory about the music, but also that gave me some comfort. And especially that we'd been derided by certain sections of certainly, the fan UK otaku journalist and fanboy community for sacrilegious to change those things, and particularly change the music. So that was nice to see.
Thank you so much. This was incredible.
Thank you.